Okay, this is going to be just a little video on validity, and I just want to talk about some of the main concepts and how we're going to be using them in the class. These notes can be found on D2L under the validity section. So, as a general idea, validity is a question of the extent to which something is what it's supposed to be. In the context of assessments, the question is, does the assessment measure what it's supposed to measure? And does it give it information, or does it give us information on the things we're actually interested in? So as a test of validity, we have these Jewish brothers, we have a college professor, we have a 21-year-old driver, or we have a pregnancy test that has been taken 5 times, always with the same positive results. In each one of these cases, right, there are certain levels of validity, right? These are not Jewish brothers. This is not a college professor. This is not really a 21-year-old named McLovin. However, the pregnancy test probably is a pretty good indicator of whether you are or not pregnant. Now, when we think of validity in terms of one word, we can think of truth, right? Is it what it's supposed to be? When we think of validity in general as a concept applied to classroom instruction and measurement, we can think of it in a variety of different ways. One, there is general validity. That can be broken down into content validity, which is something that we will be dealing with a lot, at least in this first part of the class. The idea of face validity, criterion validity, which is basically how do we know when we're measuring something that can't be seen that our measurements are actually valid. And then construct validity, which is again more about measuring these unseen things. We'll talk about what a construct is and why that's important. Now, face validity, just straight off, it's the easiest kind, and it really is you look at something and does it pass the eyeball test? Does it look like it's going to do what it's supposed to do? If you're looking at a test, do these questions look like social studies questions if it's a social studies test, or do they look like something else? This is the one you will probably be using the most, in that you probably won't be running statistical analyses, and you probably won't be doing some independent studies and getting review boards for the stuff that you do day to day. You will make a judgment based on your observations and based on your knowledge, and you'll come to a conclusion. And that is really just a face validity test. But that is something that will hopefully get more and more accurate the more you do it and the more you think about it. Content validity is really the extent to which an assessment represents the entire domain of what it is supposed to. So, the idea of equal representation, an appropriate, accurate representation, one individual representing a group, looking at a book and making a judgment based on its cover, thinking that, all the fish are gone because you haven't caught anything, thinking that everything a restaurant makes is bad because you have just one bad experience, and thinking, what students know based on asking them 1 or 2 questions. These are all examples where content validity is a question and content validity might be low because I only have a very small sampling. We try to assess what our students know about a series of learning objectives by asking them a series of questions. And if I want detailed knowledge about what my students can and can't do relative to my learning objectives, I have to ask them a similarly constructed set of questions that are representative of my learning objectives and the content that we have gone over. Portions that I have, when I prioritize things in my goals, they should be prioritized on my assessment. If I think that something is not that important in my goals, it should not take that much space up on my assessment. If I have 5 learning objectives, all of those should be represented on my assessment, especially if they are of equal importance. If my sample is not representative, if I forget to put questions concerning Objective 2 or even anything associated with Lesson 3 or something on my assessment, well, then I really don't have a full picture of what my students' knowledge is like based on my learning objectives and based on hopefully how I taught to those learning objectives within the classroom. Now, does this mean that I have to stick to the textbook materials equally or evenly? Absolutely not. It does mean that you have to stick to your goals equally and evenly, right? Prioritizing, of course, if you have more important goals, those get more attention, but that is laid out in your blueprint. In this class, we can think of content validity from assessments back to standards is that my materials that I have should be reflective of my standards. The goals that I get should reflect my materials and my standards, so there should be correlation and correspondence between these three things. Likewise, my instruction should reflect my goals, and my assessments should reflect my goals, should reflect my instruction, the materials, and the standards as well. These should all have little equal signs in between them. And when I don't have that, I run into problems. Now, in terms of my assessments, I have two things, right? I have my goals, but I also have another layer of my level of cognition. So if I have, say I'm talking about the vocabulary terms of a certain, subject, chapter, or unit that I'm teaching. Now, I might want my students just to memorize those terms. I might want them to comprehend them. I might want them to be able to apply them. Each one of those things should be specified in my goal, and they should be reflected in my assessment. Because if I assess at the wrong level of cognition, I can't really be confident in the conclusions that I would draw from those assessment results. And that's something we'll get some practice with this next week. Now, when I'm going through and looking at my goals and my assessments and stuff, I need to look at categorical representation. I need to look at depth of knowledge. Am I at that right level of cognition? I need to look at range of knowledge. The idea that when I'm talking about a concept or a set of terms, do I have broad coverage of all of them? Or did I focus on just one little thing, regardless of how deep I go? And then balance. According to my learning objectives, do I have an appropriate balance within my assessment? And if I can answer all these questions in a positive way, then I can feel pretty good that I have a good level or a high level of content validity. Now, the next video is going to talk more about these other kinds of validity that are probably less important practically, but just as important conceptually to understand. So that'll be on the next video.